Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to build this massive miter saw station. This miter saw station is made out of Baltic birch, pine, plywood, and poplar. I will have plans available on my website and the link in the description below. Also, all the tools you'll see on this video will also have a link in the description below. So if you want to see how I made it, go ahead and stick around, kick off your shoes, and I'm glad you're here. Cheers. To start off this massive project, I'm going to use a skate plate to break down all of the cabinet dividers out of a couple of sheets of pine plywood from Home Depot. The skate plate is such a joy to use. I know that all of these dividers will have the exact same width. And if you want your own skate plate, there will be a link in the description below. They are also available at Lowe's, but if you purchase from the link, the channel gets a bit of a kickback. You can go to Lowe's too, that's fine. So I figured out how to use the active track mode on my gimbal, so I can track moving objects now. So it's kind of like I have my own cameraman, but I'm the only person here. It's kind of freaky, but it's kind of cool too. The next step is to break down all the stretchers and toe kicks. The skate plate made very quick work of this. I cut out like 8 strips in like 45 seconds. That's pretty efficient for sure. And on to the first fail of the video. I'm using the track saw to cut down the dividers to final length, and one of the locks broke on the measuring tapes, making the guide shift. I didn't notice this until I cut out all of the dividers, so I have 4 or 5 that are incredibly unsquare. That's just lovely. So now I have to figure out how to fix this. And moral of the story, use a clamp to clamp your guide down. Yeah, that's probably a smart thing to do. And so I decided to fix this on the table saw. So I readjusted my anchor fence and cut a 1/2 inch off each piece. Notice that the offcuts of each piece are incredibly wonky. Yes, I said wonky. It's a technical woodworking term, look it up. The front part of the offcut is narrower than the back part and vice versa. Pro tip of the day, when cutting out wood on the table saw, make sure there's nothing in front of the wood being cut on said table saw. That wood strip caused the offcut to bind into the zero clearance insert. I thought this was a knot, but on further video review, this was not a knot. So I flipped the piece over and fixed the problem and moved on. Now moving on to toe kicks. I break out the Inker ruler and mark some measurements for the toe kicks. This is the first time I've used this ruler and I really like it. Then the Demon of the Abyss is used to cut out the toe kicks. I still can't stand the jigsaw. I don't even know why I use this thing. This thing is the bane of my existence. And moving on from my self-loathing over a power tool, I need to cut out some notches in the top of the middle dividers for the top stretchers. The stretchers need to be flush with the top of the divider, so I will use the stretcher itself as a reference. And by the way, before anybody asks, I will not have a link in the description below for Satan's power tool. That's just morally wrong and I cannot bring myself to do it. And next I'm going to cut out pocket holes with the Masca pocket hole jig. Masca Products is also a sponsor of today's video. Go check out all their sweet products on mascaproducts.com. And since this product is so compact, I'm going to take it to the dividers and drill out pocket holes for all the attachment points for the stretchers. And if you want to see more information about this jig, I do have a review video for it. Go ahead and click this card right there. Now let's move on to some assembly shenanigans. I used the flat surface of my assembly table, well, it's kind of flat, to assemble each cabinet upside down. I'm going to use a square and a clamp to square up the stretcher to the sides. And then I'm going to use a T-track clamp in case that stretcher decides to become froggy and start jumping around. And then I'm going to secure the stretcher into the side with pocket hole screws. Here is where the notches come into play. I've dropped the divider onto the stretchers, seating the divider into the stretcher with the notches. The divider is also spaced equally with the shelf that we will install in a later step. Then the divider is fastened with pocket hole screws. Note on the middle divider that I'm using a trigger clamp to keep everything in place. It also is installed the same way we installed the other divider, with the square and then locking them down with pocket hole screws. And then the toe kick is installed with a trigger clamp and another clamp to flush up the sides, and then it's all fastened into the notches that we drilled out earlier. And next I'm going to install the shelves for the 2 middle cabinets. These are the same shelves that we used as the spacers for the dividers. So use some forceful aggression and just beat them into place and then lock them down with some screws. A dead blow mallet is the weapon of choice here. And the last installation step is to install the back nailers. These back nailers are going to give you an attachment point to the studs into the walls. It's going to prevent the cabinet from racking. Just like installing the shelves, the weapon of choice is the dead blow mallet because you can tap it on the back and get it nice and flush with the backside. And now it's time for the most complicated part of this build. The floors and walls in my shop are about as square as the birdhouse I made in 4-H club in 4th grade. And that is about as square as a triangle. The bottom part of the wall is pretty square, so on the right side I'm going to lock the bottom parts into the studs with some pocket hole screws. And I'm using some Beast Mode HD pocket hole screws for this installation. And here comes the wonkiness of the wall. There is a gap on the top of the cabinet between the walls, so I'm going to drop a spacer in to fill up that gap and then lock the cabinet to the wall with a pocket hole screw. Then I come back with a flush trim saw and cut off the top of the spacers. And then I will come back and clean up the wonkiness with a chisel. And here is where it really gets gnarly. The right side space between the wall and the cabinet is even larger, so I have to drop in a piece of plywood with the spacers to get it even, and then lock it back down in with the Beast Mode pocket hole screws. And next I'm going to use the vacuum cart I built a couple years ago to get the proper spacing between the two cabinets. Then I'm going to shift the cabinet up against the cart and then we're going to lock it to the wall. Now here is where it really gets gnarly. The slope of my floor from the front to back slopes almost a foot. So I'm going to use the Viking arm to level the cabinets. And there will be more to come with the Viking arm in the later steps. And the same process is used on the left side cabinets to attach to the wall. The only thing different here is I did not use the spacers, it only needed plywood. And now that whole ordeal is over, it's time to go into cruise mode. I'm going to cut out some strips to start making the top. The top is going to be made out of Baltic birch plywood because Baltic birch plywood is a lot more stable and a lot more easy to use than regular plywood. It has 13 plies in it of actual hardwood layers and it holds screws very well. I'm going to mark the center of this plywood strip and then the center of the gap on the wall and then line up the two marks. Then I'm going to lock the piece down into place with standard construction screws. Make sure that these screws are countersunk below the surface so it will not mess up the torsion box top. And I'm also attempting to drive these screws into the stretchers into the divider walls. That way they will not get in the way of the drawers. And next I'm going to measure out the left side of the cabinet with a tape measure. Then we're going to take the piece over to the workbench and cut it out with the track saw. The track saw actually has redeemed itself. This actually went really well. I was a little mad at it before, but all is well. Then I'm going to take the piece back over and drop it into place. I'm going to level it and make sure that it's in the same plane with the middle section. And then we're going to lock it back down with the same construction screws. The left side of the top is a bit more challenging. The left side closest to the wall is shorter than the outside. This is caused by the inward bow of the wall. So I'm going to carefully measure each side, mark out the measurements with a straight edge, and then cut it with a track saw. I'm also going to use the level to make sure that this piece is in the same plane as the middle piece. This is going to cause a little gap right there, but that's okay because the torsion box will cover that gap. And now on to the fun stuff. I take the saw off of its stand and then place it into its new home. I'm centering the saw over the two dividers so it will provide extra support beneath. One of the things about the saw is that you can't put it up against the wall to do the left and right miter cuts. But it does have 4 mounting holes for standard flathead wood screws, so you don't have to go around your shop trying to find some kind of weird specially screw to mount this to the table. Well played, Delta. Well played. Next, I'm going to butt up a piece of plywood to get the spacings I need for the torsion box layout. I'm also going to lay out a 45-degree angle so it will clear the left and right miter positions. To get the spacing so that the torsion box top is dead flat with a saw deck, I use a level on the deck and then a piece of plywood and then take the measurements between the two. And then I cut out all the stretchers for the torsion box at one time. I really need some overhead dust collection. I think I'm going to make a build video for a custom made one. I'm really tired of getting sprayed with sawdust and constantly doing laundry. Next, I'm going to take measurements for the torsion box top parts. I am not going to use a tape measure. I'm going to use reference measurements and lasers. I'm going to secure the front and back stretchers to the top and then take a laser measure to get the measurement between the two pieces. Lasers are far more accurate than tape measures. Okay, I lied. I used a tape measure like one time. So I'm going to mark my piece and then mark a line with the square and then mark an X on the side that I need to cut on. Man, I love lasers. They are perfect every single time. I'm going to put the stretchers in place temporarily so I install the T-Track system I will be using for this build. This is the Easy Speedy Flip Stop and T-Track system from Custom Fabricating Solutions in Illinois. This is not your daddy's T-Track. This T-Track is 1 5/8 inches wide and 13/16 inches thick. It's a big boy. The stop block is made out of solid aluminum and it also has a thumb knob on the back of it for micro adjustments. The T-Track is also made out of solid steel. Stay tuned because I will have a review video for this complete system in all of its glory. I'm also filming a pocket hole showdown video. I will pit the top 3 pocket hole jigs in a cage deathmatch to see which one is the best. So if you want to see that video, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell to get notified when that video comes out. So first up, I'm going to use the Armor pocket hole jig to cut out all the pocket holes in the left side stretchers. I'll be using the 720 Pro from Craig for the right side. So when using long strips of plywood like this, they tend to bow a little bit. So I'm going to lock down the stretchers to the top with some trigger clamps. A trigger clamp is placed at each pocket hole all the way down the stretcher, and once the stretcher is locked down with the pocket hole screw, the bow will correct itself. And then the back stretcher is installed the same way, but there's not enough room for the trigger clamp. So just kind of move it in place and then lock it down with the pocket hole screws. And I just noticed that I drilled way too many pocket holes in the end cap. This many pocket holes is not necessary. You probably need about half of that. I got a little crazy with the pocket hole jig and probably wasted a lot of battery life in my drill. So let's just move on. And next I'm going to take a reference point for the inside cap. This is going to have a miter cap attached to it. And then a piece of stock is butted up against the angle and the reference marks are made for the miter cap. Both sides are going to be 45 degrees. So I take the part over to the miter saw and cut out the first one. And then I sneak up on the other side so that cap will fit absolutely perfectly. And this is the first part of the project where I actually use glue. I'm going to use glue and pin nails to secure the piece in place, and the pin nails will act as a clamp. Next, I'm going to attach the stretchers to the front stretchers. This is going to lock everything together. And why does my drill sound like this? There's something wrong here. No, seriously, what's going on here? That doesn't sound right at all. And next, the T-Tracks are reinstalled onto the stretchers. If you notice, there is a notch cut out on each stretcher. Just because this is a fenceless system, we want this T-Track to sit flush on the top of the torsion box. I will go back and clean up these notches with a router in a later step. Next, I will cut out the tops for the torsion box. The T-Track will be sandwiched between these two parts, just like a good old peanut butter and jelly sandwich. The front part is oversized. I will line it up with the T-Track and make some reference marks on the underside. Then take it over to the workbench and use my circular saw to cut just shy of the marks. By hand, by the way, no guides. Pro tip of the day, do not use an expensive countersink bit to drill out holes when your drill is in the hammer mode. You will break expensive bits and then you are left with nothing but a bucket of sadness. It's amazing how well your drill works when it's in the correct mode. And once you find another countersink bit, fasten the top down with some spack screws. These screws are okay, but they tend to slip on the bit, which is kind of annoying. Next, flush trim the sides with a trim router. And when you do this, make sure you remove the track because metal and router bits do not get along very well. The front side had a little too much meat for the router to handle, so I'd trim off the excess fat with a track saw. And only if weight loss in real life would be as easy of just trimming it off with a track saw. It'd be kind of painful though. And then I finish off the front with a 1/4 inch flush trim bit from Klingspor. This bit came in a set and there will be a link in the description below. And next I will drop in the back part of the top, then lock it down with some screws. This part needs to be cut to final length as there is not enough room for the trim router. As I mentioned before, the pocket holes on the right side will be drilled out with the 720 Pro. The assembly for the right side will be the exact same for the left side, so this will be a big heaping pile of rinse and repeat. The only difference is that the miter cap is at a 60-degree angle. So I cut out the angle and then sneak up on the cut on the opposite side. The other angle is like 31.6 or something like that. I don't know, I failed Coach Pound's geometry class in the 11th grade, so I don't do math very well. And I also added pocket holes to the backside of the miter cap. This is going to add a little bit more stability. Ooh, lasers. And I'd like to mention, while we just speed through this real quick, that the plans for this build will be available on my website. The link will be in the description below. Now let's move on to drawer boxes. I'm using something a little different this time. I'll be using pre-made Baltic birch drawer parts. These parts are pre-finished, pre-edge banded, and already have a groove for the bottoms. These are going to save a lot of money and time. I'm going to use the Brad Rodriguez method to size the fronts and backs of the drawer boxes. Take a measurement of your cabinet openings, subtract 1 inch for your drawer slides, and set the stop block to that measurement. Then place 2 offcuts of the same part and then make your cut. This method is perfect almost every time. Well, that's if you measure your openings correctly. I would suggest using lasers. I found out that the grooves in the drawer parts are slightly undersized. I'll be using a 1/4 inch hardboard for the drawer bottoms. So I shave off a 32nd of an inch off of each groove to fit the hardboard bottoms. Also, I'm going to trim out the grooves in the back parts to give me easy access to slide the bottoms in. And then pocket holes are drilled out into each part. And now moving on to drawer box assembly. I assemble my drawers with these Rockler clips. These things are absolutely awesome. They make assembling drawer boxes so much easier. And once you get your drawer boxes nice and aligned and flush, go ahead and lock them down with some pocket hole screws. I also like using a clamp to keep them in place. And then I cut down all the hardboard bottoms to size on the miter saw. And the nice thing about the stop block system is that it makes it so much easier to flip the piece over and make the same cut in the same place. And this is the reason why we cut the grooves off the backs of the drawers, so we can slide the 1/4 inch hardboard in for the bottoms. And then the bottoms are locked into place with a couple of screws. So do you remember when I told you to measure the cabinet openings correctly? Well, apparently I failed hard at this. I mismeasured the opening of the left interior drawer bank by 1/8 of an inch. So after wasting about an hour searching for something to use as a spacer, I finally found a piece of scrap 1/8 inch hardboard. This was the perfect size, so I cut the hardboard into strips slightly smaller than the width of the sides. And then I used Starbond CA glue to attach it. Next, I'm going to use the Spags method to attach the drawer slide catches to the drawer box. I place the drawer box on top of a piece of plywood and then use that plywood to reference the drawer slides. Then attach the catches to the drawers using 4 wood screws. And now the drawer slides are installed with the Rockler drawer slide jig. I've had this jig for about 2 years, and this is actually the first time I had a chance to use it. I think it's one of the better jigs on the market. It automatically sets the slide back 1/16 of an inch required by the manufacturer. This is how I like to space my drawers. I actually used a drawer as a reference and put a spacer on top of it, and then the jig on top of the spacer, and then lock down the slides. As I mentioned before, this is going to be a fenceless system, so I'm going to clean up the notches that were made for the T-track system. The T-track itself is actually thicker than the top piece of plywood on the torsion box, so I'm going to clean up these with a router bit. The router bit is set to just a hair thicker than the actual thickness of the T-track. And if you notice, I have the wrong bit here. This bit was too long for this, so I could not use the top bearing. I'm going to use a new clean spore blade and rip out some pieces for the trim. Trim is going to be made out of poplar. I'm going to use 2 trigger clamps to keep the poplar in place while I move it around to where it needs to be. Then the trim is secured into place with trim head screws. And I'm using screws instead of brads, just in case I want to change out the trim with a different species later. And for the side piece, I'm going to go ahead and put a round over on it before it's installed. And then the side piece is tapped into place and then secured with the same trim head screws. And then I'm going to transfer the notch into the side piece with the router. And then a round over is added to the rest of the trim pieces. Now I'm going to go back to installing some more drawers. For the tall drawers with the doors, we're going to use a spacer and the jig to install the drawer slides. Here you can see that there's 2 screws sticking down from the top. This is going to cause an issue with putting the door in. Right about there. Yep. Nope. That's not going to work.
You gotta be kidding me. Really?
So I get a grinder and I grind it down the 2 edges of the screws. And that might be the most fun I've ever had installing drawers. So I've made a design change mid-project. I'm going to add 2 more drawers to the middle banks on each side. The bottom drawers are going to be made out of 3/4 inch plywood because they're going to store heavy tools. And now we're going to move on to the drawer fronts. The drawer fronts are going to be cut out of 1 single sheet of Baltic birch plywood because I want them to have the same grain pattern. I'm going to adjust my Incra fence and then we're going to cut out each bank one at a time. This way I can ensure that the grain pattern is correct. So each time I move the fence, I'm going to cut out that piece on both pieces of plywood. This will ensure that the widths are consistent. And before I cut out each piece, I'm going to mark a carpenter's triangle and label each piece so I can keep track of what's what. To drill out the holes for the drawer pulls, I made this little down and dirty jig so I can keep each hole in the same place on all the pieces. It's just 3 strips of poplar that I butt up against the original piece, and then the width of the poplar is actually tall enough so I can slide it in 2 pieces. And if you notice, there's something wrong with this one because the large drawer front is upside down, and I didn't notice it until it was too late. Oh well. And now to drill out the holes for the cup hinges. This is my favorite jig of all time by Craig. It cuts out the holes perfectly every time. Basically, you flush up the ends to the piece of wood you're cutting into, and then you hook up your Forstner bit, and it will cut the hole to the exact same depth every time. And then you drill out your holes for the screws. And as I mentioned before, Masca Products is the sponsor of this video. They sent me 2 of these Viking arms, which are incredibly cool. They're basically a lifting system that will hold up to 330 pounds. It basically picks things up and puts them down. I'm going to use the Viking arms to install the drawer fronts so that they are flush with the bottom of the toe kit. And I'm using 2 Empire framing squares to get the 1/8 inch reveals I need for all the drawer fronts. And when you're installing these drawer fronts, it's best to work from the bottom up. Get the first one in place, and then you can just use the spacers and then drop the other ones on top of it and then lock them into place. I'm securing the drawer fronts in through the holes for the drawer pulls to temporarily hold them in place, and then I'll go in and secure the drawer fronts from the back with some drawer front screws. And I will have a complete review video for the Viking arms. And I am using Liberty door hinges here. I'm not a big fan of these because they don't have a lot of adjustability to them, so I'll probably switch these out with some blooms down the road. The fine folks at Total Boat sent me some of their Halcyon clear gloss marine varnish to use on the station. I have a Fuji 2-stage sprayer, so I'm going to thin the varnish down by 1% just so it flows a little better through the sprayer. If I had a 4 or 5-stage sprayer, I wouldn't even have to worry about thinning it down to finish it. I'm also using a 2.0 needle in the gun. And Total Boat nor Fuji are sponsors of the channel. I just really like their products. And I'm going to apply 5 coats of the Halcyon to the station on the fronts, the tops, and the sides. And one of the nice things about the Halcyon varnish is that you do not have to sand between coats. Apply your layer, let it dry for about an hour, and then apply another one. It's self-leveling, so you don't have to do anything to it. It does the work for you. Also, the Halcyon is odorless, and you don't really need to wear a respirator, but I'm wearing a respirator anyway just to be safe, as you should do with all finishing products. And the last step is to drill out all the holes into the drawer boxes so we can install the drawer pulls. I'm using cut pulls for the inner banks, and then I'm using bar pulls for the outside banks because of the design change I made mid-project. And I'll probably go back and change out the bar pulls for the cut pulls because I like the way they look. I think they look a lot better. And now this monster miter saw station is done. I'd like to thank each and every one of y'all for hanging out with me today and sitting through this video. I know it was a bit of a longer video, but I had a lot of steps to show. Also, there are plans available in the description below, so go check those out. And if you haven't already, go ahead and sub to the channel and pound that like button. I also will be having a follow-up video to install the upper cabinets, the dust collection, and maybe a few more things. Go ahead and shoot me a comment down below and tell me what you would put between the upper cabinets and the deck of the station. And I want to wish a happy Labor Day to everybody out there who is watching, and have a good day. Cheers.